When you clap two hands together, you hear a sound. What is the sound of one hand clapping?
Ah, right. That's the classic 18th century Zen Buddhist koan, isn't it? Formulated by the monk Hakuin Ekakaku.
It is! And welcome to our deep dive, everyone. Today we are taking your sources to answer that exact question.
Which is funny because, if you just sit with that riddle, your initial instinct is probably to assume it's just designed to break your reliance on logical thought.
Exactly, like it feels like a philosophical exercise, right? To prove that not everything in the universe can be solved with pure reason. You just ponder the absurdity of a one-handed clap and maybe you achieve some, I don't know, measure of enlightenment.
Right, but looking through the stack of research you sent us, this concept isn't just a brain teaser. It is actually a highly practical, historically tested life strategy.
It really is. And we are going to examine that concept by centering our entire analysis today on an ancient text, because this exact strategy shows up thousands of years earlier.
Yeah, we're looking really closely at the Torah story of Moses and the rebellion of Korach, and specifically a very, very peculiar commentary written about it in the Mishnah.
Right, the Mishnah, that foundational text of Jewish oral tradition and ethics. And the specific commentary you provided in the sources contains this grammatical mystery that just seems impossible to ignore.
It's so strange once you notice it. And to decode how Moses handled what is basically the ultimate toxic conflict, we're going to use your sources to map this ancient biblical event onto, well, particle physics.
Which is wild.
Yeah, particle physics, the military tactics of the ancient Roman Empire, and the really intense psychological pressure cooker of the 1967 Six-Day War.
I know the thread connecting a Zen koan to subatomic physics and biblical rebellions might seem a little abstract at first, but stick with us. By focusing on the underlying mechanics of how humans clash, you actually end up with a proven framework for handling the most manipulative, conflict-hungry people you encounter in your own life.
You really do. So to get there, I think we need to set the scene in the ancient Israelite camp. We are looking at Parashat Korach, which, just to be clear, means the specific weekly Torah reading portion that contains this narrative.
Right. And there is a massive mutiny brewing against Moses and his brother Aaron. It's spearheaded by a guy named Korach, and he brings along Dathan, Abram, On, and literally 250 prominent community leaders.
Yeah, that's a key detail. This isn't a fringe group. These are the respected elites of the camp, and they confront Moses with this deeply populist argument.
Right. They say, you have gone too far, for all the congregations are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. Why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly?
Which is just a devastating accusation. I mean, they're essentially accusing the man who led them out of slavery of hoarding power, of practicing nepotism.
Right, of establishing a dictatorship over a community where everyone is supposedly on equal spiritual footing.
Exactly. And this mutiny becomes the archetypal example of a destructive argument in Jewish tradition. The Mishnah, specifically in Tractate Avot, chapter 5, Mishnah 17, it attempts to categorize human conflict.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the Mishnah defines the parameters of positive and negative disputes. Right?
Yeah, it establishes a really clear dichotomy. It states that a dispute for the sake of heaven will endure, while a dispute not for the sake of heaven will not endure.
And it provides historical examples to clarify the theory. The example it gives for a healthy dispute, one for the sake of heaven, is the ongoing intellectual debate between the ancient scholars Hillel and Shammai.
Right, because they argued relentlessly, but they shared a common goal of uncovering the truth. The conflict was structural, not personal.
Exactly. But then the text provides the example of the toxic, destructive dispute. It says, this is the dispute of Korach and all his congregation.
And that phrasing right there is the anomaly driving our entire analysis today.
It's grammatically absurd. When the Mishnah described the healthy debate, it explicitly listed two distinct sides, Hillel versus Shammai, a classic matchup.
Right.
But when it describes the toxic debate, it only lists one side, Korach and his congregation. There is no opponent mentioned.
Yeah, it's super weird.
That's like promoting a boxing match and calling it the fight of Muhammad Ali. People would be like, who is he fighting? Where is Moses? Why didn't the authors write the dispute between Korach and Moses? Moses is entirely missing from his own conflict.
He is. And in ancient texts of this caliber, omissions are almost never accidental. The authors of the Mishnah were highly, highly precise with their language.
So they're hiding something.
They're hiding a massive psychological concept in plain sight. They are telling us that Moses essentially vanished from the confrontation. And to understand the physical mechanics of how someone can vanish from a direct attack, we actually need to look at astrophysics.
Oh, this is the part I love, the fundamental mechanics of a collision. Like, if I am walking and I hit a brick wall, the collision happens because of friction. The wall pushes back against my momentum.
Exactly. At a molecular level, it comes down to mass and electrical charge.
Yeah.
The reason your hand doesn't just pass through a solid table is electromagnetic repulsion.
Right, because the electrons in your hand are negatively charged and the electrons in the table are negatively charged.
Exactly. And when they get close, they violently repel each other. That repulsion is what creates the friction, the impact, the bruise.
But the sources introduce the concept of the neutrino, which is the subatomic particle that completely bypasses this rule.
Right, neutrinos are fascinating. They have almost zero mass, but their defining feature is that they carry absolutely zero electrical charge.
Wow.
Because they lack a charge, they simply do not interact with the electromagnetic force. When a neutrino encounters regular matter, there are no electrons to repel. There's no friction.
So they just go right through it.
Yeah, literally right now, trillions of neutrinos are passing through the Earth, passing through the walls of the room you're in, and passing straight through your body at the speed of light.
That is wild to think about. They leave no trace because without an opposing charge, a collision is physically impossible.
Right. And that is what Moses did. He essentially became a human neutrino. He removed his own electromagnetic charge so the attack just passed right through him.
Okay, so this physical concept directly maps onto human behavior, specifically how we respond to aggression. When someone attacks you, your biological fight or flight system flares up, right? You become highly charged with adrenaline and emotion,
You want to defend yourself. You want to push back.
which provides the exact friction the attacker is looking for. And the danger of providing that friction is perfectly illustrated by the Roman Empire in 217 BCE.
Oh, right. The Hannibal story.
Yes, Rome is facing total annihilation at the hands of Hannibal and his Carthaginian army. Hannibal's entire military genius relies on momentum and friction. He needs the Romans to meet him in open combat so he can use their own aggressive charge against them.
So Hannibal is heavily charged and looking for friction. What does Rome do?
Well, Rome appoints a dictator named Quintus Fabius Maximus to handle the crisis. Fabius studies Hannibal and realizes that the Carthaginian army is a massive, highly charged force looking for something to crash into.
Right.
So Fabius institutes a policy of total non-engagement. He shadows Hannibal's movements from the high ground. He cuts off foraging parties, but he absolutely refuses to offer his army for a pitched battle.
He becomes the human neutrino. He's starving Hannibal of the physical collision. And the psychological toll of this on the enemy is fascinating.
He really is. Hannibal goes crazy, real.
Yeah, he starts burning Italian villages to the ground. He taunts the Roman lines. He is doing everything to provoke that emotional fight-or-flight response. He needs the Romans to get angry and charge down the hill.
But Fabius maintains an iron grip on his ego and refuses the bait. He actually earns the nickname Cunctator, meaning the delayer.
But the real tragedy of the Fabian strategy is that it looks completely incomprehensible to anyone who doesn't understand the mechanics of conflict.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
To the Roman Senate and the public, Fabius didn't look like a tactical genius. He looked like a coward letting their homeland burn.
The political pressure to fight back, to defend their honor, became overwhelming. They couldn't handle the optic of weakness.
So as soon as Fabius's term ends, the Senate replaces him with Gaius Terentius Varro, and Varro is the anti-neutrino. He is driven entirely by ego, honor, and the desperate need to prove Roman superiority. He wants to crush Hannibal.
And Hannibal recognizes the shift immediately. He senses the emotional charge Varro brings to the field. At the Battle of Cannae, Hannibal uses that raw aggression against the Romans.
Right. He sets up a deliberately weak center in his formation and fakes a retreat.
Exactly. And Varro, blinded by the desire for a glorious victory, charges straight into the trap.
Varro provides the friction. He provides the second hand for the clap. And the result is the complete encirclement and annihilation of the Roman army. It stands as the greatest military disaster in Roman history, all because Varro couldn't resist the urge to collide.
It's tragic. But, the tension between Neutralizing your ego like Fabius, or charging in like Varro, it isn't just ancient history. We see the exact same psychological warfare play out in the modern era.
Oh, absolutely. The sources highlight the terrifying 3-week waiting period just before the 1967 Six-Day War in Israel as a masterclass in this dynamic.
The geopolitical parallels to Rome and Korach are striking. You have Egyptian President Gamal Abdel Nasser actively working to provoke a massive collision, like Hannibal.
Right. He closes the Straits of Tiran, which is an act of war.
Yeah.
He expels the UN peacekeepers from the Sinai. He broadcasts visceral public hate speeches threatening total destruction.
He is highly charged, setting the stage and begging the Israelis to throw the first emotional punch.
And leading Israel at the time is Prime Minister Levi Eshkol. And Eshkol is under a level of internal pressure that is difficult to comprehend. Behind closed doors, his own generals are screaming at him to launch a preemptive strike.
They are accusing him of endangering the country, and the Israeli public perceives his hesitation as paralyzing fear. He famously stammers during a national radio address, cementing the image of a weak, indecisive leader.
It is the exact same dynamic Fabius faced, the optics of cowardice. So wait, by playing the neutrino, did Eshkol just give up?
Not at all. What's fascinating here is how his stalling actually functions mechanically. By endlessly delaying, by sending diplomats to Washington and maintaining a boring gray facade, Eshkol forced Nasser's emotional momentum to peak and then decay. Nasser began to believe his own propaganda. He assumed Eshkol was too terrified to act, which bred deep complacency within the Egyptian military.
Right, so while absorbing all of that national mockery, Eshkol is quietly, meticulously authorizing Operation Focus.
Exactly. He waits until the exact moment Nasser's guard drops, and then Israel launches a devastatingly precise strike that destroys the Egyptian Air Force on the ground in a matter of hours. The emotional detachment won the war before it even started.
That's incredible. And the contrast becomes even sharper when you look at King Hussein of Jordan during that same conflict.
Yeah, King Hussein represents the Varro archetype here. He was young, ruling over a fractured population, and deeply insecure about his prestige in the Arab world.
When the war began, Egypt sent him fabricated reports claiming massive victories and an impending march on Tel Aviv, right?
They did. And despite back-channel pleas from Israel, urging Jordan to stay out of the fighting, Hussein's ego couldn't tolerate the idea of missing the glory. He was terrified of looking weak to his allies.
He abandoned any strategic detachment and engaged. Hussein provided the electrical charge the situation demanded.
And because he allowed his insecurity to dictate his actions, Jordan lost control of East Jerusalem and the entire West Bank in just 3 days.
Wow. Okay, so these historical examples of absorbing pressure and neutralizing ego bring us firmly back to the Torah narrative. We need to look closely at what Moses actually did when Korach and those 250 leaders confronted him.
Because they didn't just stand there silently while they yelled.
Right. How did Moses act like a neutrino or like Fabius?
The medieval scholar Rashi provides vital commentary on Moses' actions here. When the rebellion reaches a boiling point, Moses doesn't match their volume. He repeatedly reaches out to Dathan and Abiram, two of the key agitators attempting to open a dialogue.
And when they outright refuse to meet with him, Moses physically gets up from his place of authority and walks to their tents.
Yeah, he strips away all the expected trappings of his leadership. They are screaming about power dynamics, hierarchy, and who gets to be at the top. Moses responds by approaching them with total humility. He completely neutralizes his own charge.
There's that proverb from King Solomon, Proverbs 15.1. A soft answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger.
It encapsulates this mechanism perfectly. A harsh word is the friction. If you respond to fury with anger, you give the aggressor's emotional state a solid surface to push against. The anger escalates.
But a soft answer removes the surface. If you don't add fuel to the fire, the anger sinks.
Exactly. And the psychological strategy Moses employed thousands of years ago is widely utilized in modern clinical psychology today. The sources identify it as the gray rock method.
Okay, I've heard of this.
Yeah, it's specifically prescribed for individuals forced to interact with highly toxic, narcissistic, or manipulative people. The fundamental premise is understanding that a toxic instigator is rarely arguing about the actual topic at hand.
What are they arguing about then?
They are seeking a chemical reaction. They need a dopamine rush, what clinicians call narcissistic supply. The thrill comes from successfully manipulating your emotional state and forcing you to lose control.
So the methodology requires you to become as emotionally unresponsive and uninteresting as a literal gray rock in the yard.
Precisely. If the toxic person attacks your character, you do not defend yourself. You do not counterattack. You do not show visible distress. You deny them the emotional friction they require to sustain their attack.
Wait, I find this concept incredibly difficult to reconcile with real-world application, though. I mean, overwriting millions of years of evolutionary fight-or-flight programming is monumental.
It is. It's not easy.
Like, let's look at a modern workplace scenario. If a deeply toxic manager is berating an employee in front of the team, actively trying to humiliate them, responding like a gray rock sounds suspiciously like capitulation. Doesn't standing there silently just communicate that the manager has the right to abuse you? Isn't that just being passive?
I get why it looks that way, but the text clarifies a crucial distinction. Gray rock isn't ignoring the problem, it's neutralizing the escalation. It is an intensely active psychological stance, not a passive one. It's not a blank stare of submission. It is the deliberate extraction of emotion from the data.
Okay, walk me through the mechanics of how that actually disarms the manager.
Well, the manager is yelling because they want to see the employee flustered, angry, or defensive. The employee uses gray rock by responding exclusively to the factual components of the rant with a flat, clinical tone.
Like, I heard your notes, I will update the data.
Exactly. I hear your frustration regarding the timeline. I will adjust the spreadsheet and send it by noon. There is no apology to feed their ego. There is no defensive posture for them to attack. The manager hits a completely frictionless surface.
They're denied the dopamine reward of a reaction.
Yes, and because toxic individuals are driven by that chemical need, they will quickly become bored with a target that yields no supply and move on.
Okay, so the employee remains entirely engaged with the structural demands of the job, but completely disengages from the emotional theater.
Exactly.
This is the exact mechanism Moses used to handle Korach.
Yes. Moses never abandoned his role as a leader. He actively engaged with the structural problem by proposing a technical theological test, the offering of the incense, to resolve the leadership dispute. He provided a practical path forward, but he absolutely refused to engage in the emotional drama, the character assassinations, or the bitterness of the rebels.
Here's where it gets really interesting, tying back to the beginning. This realization brilliantly resolves the grammatical anomaly in the Mishnah.
It does.
The authors wrote, "This is the dispute of Korach and all his congregation," because Korach's group was effectively trapped in a one-sided boxing match. They were in the ring, throwing wild, exhaustive punches at the air, fighting a war entirely within their own camp. Moses declined the invitation to be their opponent. He withdrew his hand, refusing to clap.
Beautifully said. By becoming the human neutrino, Moses reduced the grand rebellion to a group of men screaming at themselves. The Mishnah encoded his psychological mastery directly into the syntax of the sentence.
But wait, there's a glaring logical hurdle in the biblical text that we have to address.
That's it.
If Moses perfectly executed the gray rock method, if he channeled the ultimate Fabian strategy of non-engagement, I mean, the story of Korach still ends with the earth literally opening up and swallowing the rebels alive while fire consumes the 250 leaders. Everyone involved in the mutiny is destroyed. How is that a successful de-escalation? Didn't the strategy fail?
Right. It seems like a failure, but the Mishnah provides the answer by categorizing disputes. The strategy didn't fail. It served its ultimate purpose as a diagnostic mechanism. Lowering your ego isn't a magic spell that makes all conflict disappear. It is a diagnostic tool.
How does removing friction diagnose the reality of the situation?
Think about the mechanics of dropping your defenses. If you are in a tense disagreement with someone, and you consciously decide to swallow your pride, lower your emotional temperature, and offer a calm, practical compromise. If the person across from you is healthy, and the dispute is genuinely about the issue at hand, what the Mishnah calls a dispute for the sake of heaven, how do they react?
Well, a healthy person is relieved. The tension breaks, they match your de-escalation, and you solve the problem together.
Right. But consider the alternative. You remove all of your ego from the equation. You offer a calm, technical solution. And the other person's rage actually escalates. They double down on the personal attacks when you aren't even fighting back. What does that behavior expose?
It exposes that the argument was a facade. It was never about the topic they claim to be upset about. They're just screaming at thin air.
Exactly. It proves unequivocally that the conflict is driven by their own deep-seated pathology, their need for dominance, or a fractured ego. The diagnostic test strips away all plausible deniability.
And the sources show this is exactly what the test exposed in Korach. Rashi's insight reveals that Korach's populist rallying cry about equality, all the congregation are holy, was pure political spin. Korach didn't actually care about an egalitarian society.
No, his true motivation was intense jealousy over nepotism,
Yeah.
but only because the nepotism didn't benefit him personally. He had been passed over for a prestigious leadership role within the Levite tribe, a role Moses gave to Korach's younger cousin, Elizaphan ben Uziel. Korach just wanted power. He wanted the top tier of the hierarchy for himself.
So, by refusing to fight back, Moses forced Korach's underlying toxicity out of the shadows. The rebellion couldn't be disguised as a noble pursuit of equality anymore. The unprovoked aggression laid Korach's true motives bare for the entire community, and the text implies, for God to judge.
Right. The destruction of Korach wasn't a failure of Moses' strategy. It was the ultimate consequence of Korach's exposed nature.
And for you listening, the application of this ancient wisdom to modern life is profoundly liberating. When you face an antagonist and apply this diagnostic test when you become the neutrino and they keep swinging, you gain total clarity about the nature of the interaction.
It changes everything.
You realize that the person screaming across the desk from you is desperately trying to force a one-handed clap. They are trying to use you to regulate their own internal chaos. And the moment you see the mechanics of what they're doing, you are free.
You are. You are released from the exhausting human instinct to defend your honor. You no longer have to prove that your perspective is valid to someone who has absolutely no interest in truth.
Their anger is exposed as a closed loop that actually has nothing to do with you. You are just their platform. You're just the closest available surface they hope to strike.
Recognizing that dynamic saves an extraordinary amount of psychological energy, and it prevents you from absorbing the guilt or insecurity they are trying to project onto you.
So, to recap this incredible journey, we started by looking for the sound of one hand clapping in an 18th century Zen koan. We mapped the subatomic reality of neutrinos to understand why humans collide.
We saw how Quintus Fabius Maximus absorbed the mockery of Rome to starve Hannibal of friction.
We explored how Levi Eshkol projected paralysis to dismantle an existential threat to Israel.
And we traced all of it back to the Mishnah, decoding the grammatical brilliance of how Moses handled the toxic rebellion of Korach.
It's amazing how it all connects.
It really is. And you now possess two highly practical frameworks. You have the gray rock method to drain the momentum of manipulative individuals by denying them emotional friction. And you have the diagnostic tool, the profound realization that some fights are entirely about the other person's broken ego.
Which saves you from unnecessary guilt and wasted energy.
Exactly. Though our sources do note one critical caveat here. These tools are strictly for toxic environments. Do not utilize the gray rock method on your spouse, your family, or healthy friends.
Right, because healthy relationships fundamentally require engagement. They need real discussion. They need the friction of two people bringing their authentic selves to a disagreement to forge a compromise.
You cannot be a human neutrino when your partner is expressing a genuine emotional need. Discernment is everything. Keep the tactical detachment reserved for the Hannibals and the Korachs of your life.
So, a final thought for you to ponder. The next time you feel the adrenaline spike, when your ego demands that you engage in a shouting match to defend your honor, take a moment to analyze the mechanics of the collision. Ask yourself, are you trying to solve a legitimate problem? Or are you simply volunteering to be the friction for someone else's unmanaged electric charge? Because sometimes, in the face of manufactured chaos, the most powerful, deafening sound you can possibly make is silence.